Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. It's yet another Dump the Corruption stream. And what I'll be talking about in this stream is how AIPAC talks to its donors. How does it get them to donate? A very interesting question. Okay, I think. Hello, Dolores. Thank you for sharing. There's a very good article that I've been using all day, it seems. This is my third stream, of the day. It originally appeared, in the Lever. I picked it up in Portside. It's by Amos Barshad. Originally, it was published, in the Lever. Sorry, the Lever. I keep getting that mixed up. The title of it is Inside the Israel Lobby's New 90 Million War Chest. Of course, they've said they're ready to spend 100 million, so maybe it's 100 million war chest and only on the squad, so maybe it's more than that. But I've been, in all the three streams, I've been going through this one article because it has such good information in it. The first stream dealt with who the donors are. The second, and how much they're donating in rough terms. And the second is about what AIPAC does, how it really works, on a day-to-day basis. And it emphasized the formation of its two related organizations. AIPAC formed a PAC in 2022, and it also formed a super PAC, the United Democracy Project, in 2022, both of which spent big in the election of 2022. So now I'd like to share this one to Facebook. So if you'll excuse me for just a minute, I will do that. And here it is. So here's a section of this post on how AIPAC talks to its donors. Outside of the organization's high-profile annual conference, so talks to its donors through an annual conference, AIPAC officials seldom speak publicly. In donor-only virtual events reviewed by the Lever, the organization's chief executive spoke at length about the organization's strategies. On November 29th, AIPAC hosted a meeting, quote, live from Israel, a conversation with AIPAC leadership, unquote, featuring AIPAC President Michael Tuchin and Howard Kohr, its CEO. So interesting, the president is not the CEO. Placed on a glass table in front of them was an AIPAC coffee mug holding one little American flag and one little Israeli flag. Tuchin spoke briefly about an incident that had occurred a few days before. A protest at his home in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. Referring to the protesters as, quote, pro-Hamas vandals, unquote, Tuchin explained that they were, quote, blasting sirens, beating drums, unquote, and throwing baby body bags covered with blood around our house, unquote. Then to spotlight support that AIPAC has from the political establishment, Tuchin ticked off the messages of support he received from prominent figures after the protest. The second gentleman, quote, Douglas Emhoff called. The second gentleman, of course, is the husband of our Vice President, Kamala Harris. And so he, quote, called the acting governor of California. The mayor of Los Angeles called several times. Karen Bass called him several times. Many senators, members of Congress, and ambassadors. I'm just dying to hear what Nancy Pelosi called him. Next, Kohler and Tuchin brought up their current focus, fighting a, quote, premature, unquote, ceasefire. Quote, Israelis, we believe, will make clear that they're doing remarkable things to minimize civilian casualties, unquote, Kohler said. Quote again, but we have to remind members of the Senate and the House that the very strategy of Hamas, the predicate of their strategy, is that they have built an entire civilian infrastructure on their military and terror capabilities, unquote. What does that mean, I wonder? Quote, it's not possible to meet the objectives without some civilian casualties, unquote. Kohler added, quote again, this is not going to be pretty, the line between civilian and terrorist. And it does exist. It's very difficult in Gaza. Well, it seems to me if you can't meet the objectives without a great deal of civilian casualties, and certainly in the war in Gaza, there have been a great deal of civilian casualties. It seems to me that what has to go is the objectives, not international law, which forbids the targeting and killing of civilians. What has to go is the objectives, not the genocide that is being carried on right now. Tuchin suggested that it could have been an AIPAC delegation and possibly an acting U.S. lawmaker killed on October 7th. Oh, my God. Quote, I've been to Kfar Aza twice this year with delegations, unquote, he said, referring to one of the sites of the Hamas-led attacks. Quote, with 29 members of Congress, we stood steps away from where Hamas attackers murdered people in cold blood. It really hit home, unquote. So there they are. Okay, what Tuchin is trying to do, is to say to lawmakers, these Hamas attacks might be directly directed at you. In other meetings, Tuchin underscored similar sentiments about the vulnerability of all Jewish people. In one, he hailed the Israeli military as a great transnational protector. It's for all of us around the globe that the IDF, quote unquote, the Israeli Defense Forces, quote unquote, is fighting. But in another, he said that Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other Iranian proxies can consistently confirm their intentions to murder as many Israelis and Jews as possible, quote unquote. I believe that's a lie. I don't believe Hezbollah has that intention. I don't know about other Iranian proxies. I don't know what he means, by Iranian proxies. But I don't think the Iranians themselves have as their intentions to murder as many Israelis and Jews as possible. But who am I to question the word? Is it Michael? Of Michael Tuchin. Is it Michael? Michael, yeah. For a minute there, I thought it was Martin. In the December meeting, where Eisen, this is the Israeli colonel, first name K is Miri Eisen, I believe, claimed, quote, "We're trying to save lives," unquote. Speakers echoed the idea that any member of the extended AIPAC network or their family could just as likely have been the victims of the October 7th attacks. "It could have been my parents," quote unquote, Eisen said. Quote, "It could have been my children," unquote. The moderator, AIPAC educational seminar leader, Renee Sharon, quickly interjected, quote, "I want to say, Miri, it could have been one of our AIEF groups, the AIEF, or the American Israel Education Foundation, is an affiliate AIPAC organization that leads Congress members on tours of Israel. Quote, all the times that we've been down there," unquote, in the south of Israel near the Gaza border, quote, "it could have been any of us," unquote. In the December 21st donor meeting, the special guest was Yaakov Katz, former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Quote, "A lot of people love to play the numbers game," he said early in the meeting. Quote, 20,000 dead. That was roughly the estimated civilian casualty total at the time Katz was speaking. It's currently at more than 25,000, but I truly think that's an underestimate. It must at least be 27,000, and then another 7 or 8,000 are under the rubble. Quote, "Well, look at the fact that we're looking at 7,000 terrorists killed, and we're looking at a ratio of combatant to civilian of 1 to 2. Seems to me it's more like 1 to 3 or 1 to 4. Except I don't even know whether they've gotten 6 or 7,000 terrorists killed. I don't know about that. Per Katz's own numbers," the article says, "the ratio would be closer to 1 alleged member of Hamas killed for every 3 civilians." Quote, 1 to 2 is actually quite good when you think about the compact zone, the density, the urban terrain, unquote. But Katz added, quote, "While it does look like there's a lot of devastation and destruction inside the Gaza Strip, the Israeli military is operating with a lot of precision." Then he switched gears. Precision, my butt. Then he switched gears to talk about how the Israeli military, quote, "in the last 60 days or so, has really reclaimed its glory of being an aggressive and effective ground force," unquote. That's another statement that I sincerely doubt. I think its reputation has now been established as an extraordinarily effective killer of women and children. But that's just me. On January 18th, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Senator John Cornyn, Senator Gillibrand is from New York, Senator Cornyn is from Texas, Senator Gillibrand is a Democrat, Senator Cornyn is a Republican. Cornyn joined a donors-only meeting. Quote, "From the front lines to Capitol Hill," unquote. When asked to explain why Senator Sanders and other Congress members have criticized Israel's war tactics, Gillibrand credited bad intelligence. As a member of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees, Gillibrand explained, she receives regular briefings on Israeli military strategy that include, quote, "how many innocent civilians they're willing to accept in their targeting," unquote, which has convinced her that Israel follows, quote, all of the humanitarian agreements, unquote, in a thoughtful and methodical way. Meanwhile, her colleagues don't have, quote, access to that information, and so they're left with misinformation from their constituents. As to the source of misinformation, she identified, quote, TikTok and China and Russia and our other adversaries, unquote. Quote, we're losing the communications war, she added, to quote, absolutely horrific rhetoric against Israel, accusing the country of genocide, accusing them of occupation, accusing them of white supremacy. It's beyond recognition. There is no truth in those narratives. Well, who am I going to believe, her or my lying eyes? As far as occupation is concerned, don't they call it the Israeli occupation forces themselves? So, addressing widespread calls for a ceasefire, Kirsten Gillibrand conceded that some of the people calling for one are doing so, quote, because they want innocent lives to be protected, unquote. Then added, quote, but they may not understand if you call for a ceasefire, you can't get the hostages back. Well, I don't know. Maybe you can call for a ceasefire and you can get the hostages back. Why can't you get the hostage? Didn't you get some hostages back before in the last ceasefire? Since October 7th, the Israeli military has rescued one hostage and accidentally killed at least 3 others. Well, that's a ratio of 3-to-1 in favor of killing the hostages, isn't it? Is that what the Israelis are about? Killing the hostages? During a 7-day pause in the fighting in November, more than 100 hostages were released. Bagadi Eiskenat, yes, it's Eiskenat, a member of Israel's 5-man war cabinet, recently told Israel's Channel 12, quote, it is impossible to bring the hostages back alive in the near future without a deal. During a 7-day pause in the fighting in November, more than 100 hostages were released. Bagadi Eiskenat, a member of Israel's 5-man war cabinet, recently told Israel's Channel 12, quote, it is impossible to bring the hostages back alive in the near future without a deal, unquote, and that those who suggested otherwise are feeding lies to the public, unquote. Well, of course, you have to have a ceasefire deal in order to get back the hostages. I think that's what others are saying. I think there will be negotiations during the ceasefire to get the hostages back alive. It is my understanding that a good many hostages have already been killed by Israeli bombings. I don't even know if there's a count of how many hostages are left. Anyway, negotiations are currently ongoing for a deal in which the remaining hostages will be released partially in exchange for a 2-month ceasefire. At the close of the January AIPAC meeting, Cornyn was asked what his personal message was to Israel. Quote, don't give up hope, he said. We are there with you. We are inseparable, and Israel's future is really the United States' future. While AIPAC has told its donors Israel is minimizing civilian casualties, critics of the country's military argue such claims are not credible. Paul Rogers is a professor of peace studies at Bradford University. He says, quote, 1% of all Gazans have been killed in the space of 3 months, unquote, he said. Quote again, that is an incredible intensity of death. In January, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to, quote, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of genocide, end quote, of genocide. And by the way, they specifically ordered Israel to stop the military from killing people. The ruling came as a result of a petition brought by South Africa accusing Israel of genocide. Adila Hassim, the lawyer representing South Africa, argued that the, quote, level of Israel's killing is so extensive that nowhere is safe in Gaza. Civilians have been killed if they failed to evacuate in the places to which they fled, and even while they attempted to flee along Israeli declared safe routes, unquote, she added. Beyond the military tactics, she noted the civilians are now dying by, quote, starvation, dehydration, and disease, unquote. Many say that the area, Gaza, is on the verge of famine. According to the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, Israel is overseeing the creation of a famine by refusing to allow necessary food supplies to enter Gaza via aid trucks in the wake of the widespread destruction of fields, factories, and warehouses. In what might be a drastic undercount, the World Health Organization is estimating there are more than 400,000 cases of infectious disease in Gaza. Eva Borgwardt, the spokesman for the American Jewish anti-occupation group If Not Now, hopes that AIPAC's support of Israel in the wake of the Gaza crisis will create an inflection point in a lobbying group's relationship with the Democratic Party. Quote, AIPAC's dangerous aim is to convince people that their basic values, equality, freedom, the value of human life, should not apply to the Palestinian people, unquote, she said. That's what AIPAC thinks, she said. Democrats, Borgwardt argues, have a chance now, quote, to renounce AIPAC, uphold the value that all human life is precious, and say that no more U.S. weapons should go to the Israeli government's horrific assault on Palestinian life. But so far, outside of pushback from a minority, the Democratic Party has remained as stalwart as the GOP in its support of Israel. And for AIPAC, whose mission it is to bolster American support for Israel, these are boom times. In the face of the ongoing military assault on Gaza, AIPAC has a compelling narrative to push on its donors. During the December donor-only meeting before signing off, Colonel Miri Eisen was asked one more question, quote, what can we do to help Israel now? What does Israel need from us? Quote, you're listening, you're engaged, you're calling, you're doing what you're doing in the United States, unquote. Eisen said, quote, that's what we need. We need that backing. We can't be alone. There shouldn't be Israel alone, and it isn't because of you, unquote. She added that after October 7th, she was mobilized by the Israeli military as well as her husband and all three of her children. Just that day, the five of them were all together, all back in their military uniforms, and took photos to commemorate the moment. And through their support for AIPAC, Eisen said to the donors, quote, you're all mobilized too. So that's how AIPAC talks to the donors in order to keep them motivated to put in those huge donations that we talked about in our first stream, of the day. Evidently, they're more successful at doing that now than they have ever been before. So, I have a lot of comments, which I'll go through quickly because D's show starts in 4 minutes and I need to be there. Steve says Brentwood is even richer than Beverly Hills. I didn't know that. Doc, are you familiar with the story of Han, the 6-year-old Gaza girl kid? Absolutely familiar. We covered it on D's show in depth a few days back. And he says, hi, Joe, caught you late again, but I made it, Steve. I saw something about that today when the 15-year-old called Red Crescent after being ambushed by IDF tanks. Yes, but then the 15-year-old was killed, and Hind herself was talking to the Red Crescent, calling for help. Gillibrand sounds like the ministry of propaganda sometimes. She's real impressed with her position on the Intelligence Committee. And Steve Holmes said, yes, when the rescuers showed up, the IDF killed them and her. It's heartbreaking. Crystal covered it best on Breaking Points on YouTube. No, Steve, we covered it best. We covered it best on D's show. I beg to differ with you about that. We covered it best in much greater detail than Crystal covered it. I mean, Crystal is like 5-minute cover, maybe 10-minute cover at most. We had a whole show on it. Geraldine Schaumburg says, AIPAC merely bribes our government. Kick out every single politician with dual citizenship who takes money from AIPAC or Israel. Zion Nazis are no different, than Nazis. Geraldine, I have condemned the current Israeli Zionist government for its Nazi-like tactics. Geraldine points out Netanyahu brags he owns America. I know. And that is the point of dump the corruption. That's why we have to dump the corruption. That's why we have to follow the rule in the next election. That's why we have to get a movement following the rule. Here is the rule again. Vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corps, individuals, PACs, or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. And given how much money is going to come from the United Democracy Project, the AIPAC Super PAC, in the 2024 election, the only way to work against that is to vote according to this rule. To vote against any candidate who doesn't repudiate all Super PAC support, including the AIPAC support, who does not repudiate all AIPAC support. The way to end the rule of AIPAC in Washington is to use this rule. Use the dump the corruption rule. And on that note, I think I'm going to end this show and get my butt over to D's. And here is Steve GII saying, breaking, UC Davis divests from Israel following the passage of a bill which prevents the ASU CD's $20 million budget from being spent on companies complicit in the occupation and genocide. Okay, Rashida Tlaib has jumped, the genocide shark. I'm not sure what that means, but I am, my lying eyes tell me that we are witnessing a genocide in Gaza. And on that note, I will say good night. Probably see you tomorrow night on D's as well as tonight.